thank you, ORF, for bringing the multiple think tanks here, especially from different parts of the country. This session, if you have seen that concept note brilliantly developed, I just put it as in 5 or 6 questions to the panel, and also brief what is the expectation from the panel from the ORF perspective. There are 3 things we are looking at: global conflicts, stability, and development. If I can summarize those 2 big paragraphs in 6 bullet points and add 1 or 2 of mine to that one. The first question is the conflicts in the developing world. The big causes that we have been talking about. But I would like the panel to also look at the conflicts in the developed world. The last 2-3 years, the evolution of Trump and what we saw recently in Europe in terms of election talks about the developed world also is facing fault lines. What that means for us, all of us. Immigration is one big issue that we are talking about. The tariffs is another issue. We are going to suffer. So my first question, the first bullet point is not only the conflicts in developing world, the developed world seems to be facing even more increasing fault lines. That's number 1. Number 2, the concept note also looks into the fragmentation within, especially when it talks about the role of the elites. I think this is something that we have also been talking about in terms of elite capture. Seems there is a elite fracture also. We saw it in the West Asia, we saw it in South Asia, the capture and the fracture in terms of fragmentation. So I would like you to look into. The third question, again, the concept note looks into is in terms of post-conflict recovery. My question to you is, are we in a post-conflict recovery, or only violence keeps ending, but conflict is a continuum? Do we see violence coming and going with conflicts continuing? That's my third question to you from the concept note. The fourth one, a brilliant note from the concept, brilliant question from the concept note that I can gather, is the role of the women. This year happens to be the 25th year of the UNSC 1325, the great WPS agenda, Women, Peace and Security agenda that came in 2000, where we are in terms of looking at this. The last point is in terms of development aid and where India should look at, including the peacekeeping operations that is referred in the concept note. May I invite the panel to look into those 5 bullet points that we have in front of us. And may I also request you to keep to 5 minutes so that we'll have at least 40 minutes of discussion. So on the 4th minute, I'll let my phone give a beep, and the 5th minute, I'll throw the phone at you if you don't mind. Okay, we'll start with Shanti. Shanti is from Goa. She is the founder, director of Mantra Institute of Strategic Studies and World Trade.
Thank you, Shubha. I think those 5 points in 4 minutes is really unjust. So I'll happily take your phone. Please throw it at me. So having said that, good evening, everybody. It's great to be back here. It's the 8th forum. I've been here from the first, and it's good to see the proliferation of the think tank space, because that's actually what we need. Also thank ORF and Harsh for putting this together and getting all of us from all over India. It's usually Delhi, but here we see other places represented very well. So I'm very happy to be here. Now, coming to your question about conflicts on the global scale, we look at the global scenario, there's a lot of flux. And there was this discussion of how India is dealing with that uncertainty. But in terms of conflicts, we do see a proliferation here. If you looked at what happened in Cold War, there was Cold Peace. Then you had the post-Cold War, where there was a lot of fluidity. But after the post-Cold War and the unipolar moment, and now the change in the unipolar moment, which is leading to a lot of churning in the geopolitical system, has thrown up a lot of uncertainty, just not between states. Just not between the developed and the developing world, but also about the non-state actors, particularly those transnational actors, terrorist groups who are organized criminals who have taken on a larger scale. And I like to focus more on that, because I think this whole talk about the geopolitics is taking a different stream altogether. Now, if you look at the developed world, I mean, we see the conflict which broke out between Russia and Ukraine. We also see what's happening in the Middle East and what happened in Syria. And these are conflicts which are not going to be resolved easily because they have a huge historical legacy, and multilateral institutions like the UN are simply not adept to deal with it. Now, coming to the fact of elite capture, power capture which is occurring, and whether elites really have the legitimacy and authority to govern the states, I would say no. If you see what's happening in the US today and other parts of the world, you also see a rise of oligarchy in different forms. The business and the politics have come together. Do they really represent the will of the people? Do they really represent democracy of what we are talking about? Or are we looking at different political systems for which we need different methods of intervention? And I would specifically focus on the developing world. My work has been in Afghanistan, and what happened there was a classic case study of how the state collapse occurred. And that has lessons which are very instructive for everyone who is studying post-conflict stabilization. One is Afghanistan was never post-conflict, and most of the intervention there was in wasted effort for the simple reason that it was an ongoing conflict theater. So you have Taliban there, which has captured power, a regime not recognized by the international community, deriving authority by the de facto status, and no one can do anything about it. So here we are with a terrorist organization running a state. So we are looking at different modes of intervention here. But what I would like to specifically focus on is that most of the intervention in the last couple of decades have been on the security and very much less on the economics. Particularly if you look at the developing world, look at South Asia, look at Africa, economic stabilization and recovery has been very less. And that brings you to the last question, since I don't want the phone to be thrown at me, is about how do we actually intervene in conflict theaters for long-term stabilization. And the missing word is the long-term stabilization. Every country which intervenes in a conflict theater is on a quick impact project, has very little time and patience to achieve its end. And given the fact that most of the countries who get into conflict theaters, be it Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria or Ukraine or any of these countries, don't have an end vision in mind. And just because of the lack of an end vision, there is a huge wasted effort which leads to other non-state actors capturing that space. And here we are at that scenario where we do see this rise, and it is a very difficult scenario. If you look at what's happening in Syria, it's again instructive. The last point is about women, right? And it's 25 years, and it's a huge achievement that we are looking at WPS agenda and including women more in peacekeeping and more in UN activities. But has it really made changes in the way UN has been functioning? I doubt it. So we can talk about it maybe in the debate, but to bring in and highlight India's role, I think India has contributed hugely to UN, particularly on women and gender mainstreaming. But what India needs to do more in its approach, maybe I can come back when I have more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti, for that brilliant note. I know her for the last 25 years. This is the first time she has listened to me. And thank you, Shanti. Now let's move to the second intervention by Dr. Anita Gupta from Kolkata. She is the Director of Asia and Global Affairs. Ma'am, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to be able to discuss a number of issues over the next 1.5 days. There is, of course, a number of ongoing conflicts, not just in the developing world, but also, as the chair pointed out, in the developed world. And unfortunately, a very large part of that conflict has now started causing extensive civilian casualties. And this is the sad part of the story, that there is a lot of conflict that is causing civilian conflicts and displacement. And I think that is something that we should really focus on when we're talking about global conflicts today. And of course, there has been some discussion about the fact that international organizations and institutions that had traditionally been set up to look into these conflicts and deal with these conflicts are really not being able to deal with them to the extent that it was expected of them. That is to put it very, very mildly. So what is the solution? I think the problem basically is that when we look at global conflicts, we think that it is a question of one size fits all, that all conflicts are similar, which is the basic problem that when we are looking at the global scenario, we have to understand that each conflict situation is different. And the solution to each conflict situation, therefore, lies not in this one size fits all where, we try to bring back formal institutions and organizations into place, a democratic process, a liberal economy. That is not the solution to every conflict that is happening globally today. And it is here that I think alternatives are necessary. And in a sense, India could play an interesting role here, because India has the divergent experience of being able to deal with conflicts among various diverse groups of people, and therefore has the experience of looking at conflicts and resolving them, not just through formal institutional processes, but through local processes, through the intervention of elders, through the intervention of indigenous ways of looking at these conflicts and resolving them. And this would be my submission today, that this is the necessity in terms of both resolving the conflicts as well as bringing a certain amount of stability to this world, which would obviously lead to development. My work and my organization's work is based on Asia. So I think I will just stop with one small example, which will also look into the gender issue of a conflict, a local conflict that happened between the Uzbeks and the Kyrgyz in Osh in 2010. Now, the resolution of it was done by UN agencies through women of both the communities. Now, initially there was reluctance, of course, on the basis of all the people to kind of come together and look for solutions. But then local chai khanas are where people traditionally used to meet to resolve issues. And instead of inviting them to each other's houses, groups of women were taken to these chai khanas to resolve issues. And then something very interesting was done. These women went back to their households and convinced the men, and Central Asia is a very, very patriarchal society, that the solutions that they wanted actually came from them. So the Aksakals and the leaders and the patriarchy actually put forward these solutions and resolutions, and to a very large extent, it was able to solve the issues. And they were able to do this because they were part, yes, I know, because they were part of this community. They knew the language of resolution and were able to deal with it much better than, external interventions that would probably not have taken these small local issues into account. And once again, let me get back to the Indian question and say that, it is dialogue, it is mediation through smaller groups, it is mediation through local agencies that is a much better way of solving conflicts to a very large extent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's Dr. Anita. Another sharp intervention from the second panelist. Now let's move to the third panelist, Professor Mohan Kumar. He's the director from Research Institute in Thiruvananthapuram. Sir, over to you. I would, especially the two men, I want you to have extra focus on WPS and women. I think we should not fall behind on that. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, moderator, for your crystal gracing of these, you have clearly articulated what are the agenda to be discussed. And I agree with the moderator that the agenda has been well set in the note circulated. I also agree with the other two panelists that the stability is very important for India than any other countries in the world. For the simple reason that we have 142 crore people. The economic stability in of the world matters a lot to India. And the second point that I would like to talk about is that whether India will be able to lead the peacekeeping force in the world. The difference between the direct combat or direct attack, direct arms war and the trade war that has been triggered by United States, Donald Trump, is slightly different one. That direct war affects people who are victims of the direct attacks to a great extent. But in this case, which January 20, what Donald Trump has started is something different, that it is going to have a devastating impact on the whole world. On January 30th, he has started attacking the Somalian people, saying that there are ISIS in Somalia. I will trace you and kill you. That is his slogan. And the clear case is that in Somalia, Russia and China have invested more than what America has done. And the second issue is about the migration. There are 1.4 crore undocumented migrants in US, of which 7.25 lakhs are Indians. The present regime has not started deporting Indians. They will start it. But they have already deported 5,000 Guatemalans. It is an ethnic issue, and the religious, identities matters there. So what I'm trying to say in this context is that the global stability for India's economic growth, it to give employment, it to around 78 lakh, 78 crore people every year is an Herculean task for India, for which we need to have our house in order. And I do believe India would be able to lead the, peacekeeping force in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mohan Kumar. Now let's move to Dr. Manish Dabhade from the India Futures founder. Manish, over to you.
Thank you, Subha, and thanks ORF and Harsh Pant for this terrific opportunity to meet in India's top think tank community in all its diversity and brilliance. Let me start by reiterating and maybe adding to what has been said earlier in terms of the larger sort of theme of today's conversations. So I think it is beyond doubt that we are all living in a world of transition. Many have used the word turbulence, flux. But I think, and obviously these include two hot wars, ongoing hot wars and cold wars, especially in regional theaters. But what I see is that we are actually witnessing a complete rewiring, or one can call it a reimagination of global governance spaces, global governance structures, and a new global compact is being written. And that is what I think. And the crucial, I think, element of that is the complete sort of embrace. I mean, earlier you had an aversion, but now it is an embrace of the balance of power logic, and accompanying with that is the spheres of influence system. I think that is really something which we all have to grapple with. And at one level, Samir Saran did talk about, for example, Mandala, but I think it's really the Matsya Nyaya in operation we are going to see in the next couple of years. And here I think, let me, and the other panelists have really looked at specific policy choices, but can we also have a look at India's foundational sort of frameworks, ideational frameworks, which actually help us diagnose better the choices on issues of war and peace, conflict and order and development. And here I think I've identified a couple of first principles which are actually India's governing philosophy in international relations. First and foremost amongst them is internationalism. I think India is not caught, and someone did mention, I think that India was not in the binary of nationalism versus internationalism. If you look at our own history, India has always been on the side of internationalism, and again from a pure pragmatic interest that it really suits India and its interest. The second foundational sort of framework within which India makes and exercises its choices is a clear no to strategic dominance. I think at the core, India does not seek to dominate at one level internationally. I think India aspires to empower other countries, and we saw it beautifully come up in the G20 summit. And I think the most important indicator of that was about the use of nuclear weapons. The threat of or the use of nuclear weapons, obviously in the context of what was happening in Russia, Ukraine. So I think that was a very clear indicator of what Indian conceptions about power, about the use of power were in that sense. The other important, I think, consideration which I would like to put across is that India sees itself as a bridge nation between the East and the West, North and the global South. So India is not going to be again be this, and that's exactly why India talks about multi-alignment, talked about non-alignment earlier. We don't want to be part of any sort of power politics and reject binary choices of global structures. One of the very important, one of the very, I thought, fascinating points made by Prime Minister Modi at G20 was that India's approach is one of healing, not harming, of dialogue, not discord. In that sense, strategic autonomy is really the mantra for India's foreign policy in many ways. The last point, obviously, is this: everyone is aware about India's formulations of Vishwa Bandhu or Vishwa Mitra. I think through Vaccine Maitri, even in Quad, and Quad is really about global public goods. So I think at many levels, India has been a champion of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in a real sense, including of African Union in G20 is a very important example. And looking at development assistance, India doesn't talk of the traditional donor sort of recipient relationship, but it is really about Vidya Dan, it is really about capacity building. So I think these are, I mean, some points I thought can help us better understand the specifics if you understand the foundational sort of ideational frameworks which India brings to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Now let's give a big hand of applause for the panel for being very brief. I see there are around 38 minutes we have in front of us. I think we have enough time for Q&A. Again, we'll go into those four broad themes: the state of conflicts, developed world, developing world, state fragility, role of elites, the WPS agenda, the role of women, peacekeeping, and the development, and whether the development is good enough to address the larger issue of state fragility. So let us have our discussions on these larger bullet points that the ORF has tasked us to. The floor is now open. We can have it in 2-3 rounds, sir, and then ma'am, I'll come to you.
Thank you so much to the chair for the opportunity. I'm Binayak Datta. I represent the Asian Confluence, a think tank that engages with Northeast India. We are talking about peacekeeping. We're talking about conflicts. I think it's also important to flag that the strength of a chain is in the weakest link. And when we're talking about India, we have to probably also draw attention to Northeast India. A country that's, which actually leads India to be surrounded by at least 5 countries, if not more. And then you have a continuous round of conflicts there. So what are we doing about it? I see the panel talk about India and its role everywhere, but what about the weaknesses inside? Do we talk about the weaknesses
Thank
inside?
you, sir. We will talk about this now. I'll request the panel to. Ma'am?
I'm Rajni Shaleen Chopra. I'm the director of Center for Kashmir Analysis and Research. My question to Dr. Anita Gupta. You talked about local solutions, how they can emerge for conflicts. We have a situation in Kashmir where I am troubled by the response across the nation, the lack of understanding to the Kashmir dynamics, how they impact national security. So how can the think tanks across the country or the academia, can we mobilize them to fight the narrative battle better? Currently, we are globally losing the narrative battle on Kashmir, despite the very good work done after the abrogation of Article 370 which was very essential. So, ma'am, how can we mobilize it?
Thank you. That point is well taken, ma'am. We'll talk about those two conflicts subsequently. Sir, to you.
Thank you. I'm Pradeep Mehta. I head CUTS. It's a 40-year-old global NGO. We work on a very wide bandwidth of issues, including trade and strategic affairs. Now, a point made by Manish Dabhade just struck me as to the intervention that Modi had with Putin to not look at the nuclear option. I think that was one important aspect that you raised. Now, my larger question is, and none of you spoke about the fact that there is a military-industrial complex which is interested in conflicts, because that is how they continue to make money. And the other tragedy is that India is increasingly developing its own military industry and becoming a big exporter. We are, the last year's export was 20,000 crores of weaponry. So there is an economic interest, a selfish interest, I would say, in seeing that conflicts continue to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. None of us spoke because we are waiting for you to speak on that. Can I take one or two more questions, sir, please, again? Yeah.
Sir, for peace building and conflict resolution, the human right aspect is very important. That should be taken into account, either resolve the domestic conflict, domestic peace building, or the international conflict and international peace building. So why not we are focusing on addressing the human rights issues or violation of human rights?
Thank you. That's a very good point. We'll come to the panel after this question, sir.
My question is generally focusing only on the UN peacekeeping and the WPS, what you have mentioned. I think India has done tremendously good job as far as the peacekeeping is concerned. As you said that, in fact, it is the Indian way of ethos or the way of working that we are successful, and we are not adopting a Western template to be applied in Africa for any resolving the thing. Women in peace and security, live example, I'll say Liberia, what we done, what our girls had, this form police unit had gone and done, that was the Indian template. Now, only thing more to be added to it, until unless you are one of the pen holders, which not likely to be in the near future, until unless you're sitting on the table to dictate, or you have that type of funding to the UN, because in today, whosoever is the funder, he is the taker from the UN, what we say. So we have done very well, and more contribution required, efforts being made, but until as the India is on the table, I don't think we can achieve much.
Thank you, sir. We'll get back to the panel. On the last question, may I put a sub-question to you? Can India do something without sitting on the table and without having a deep pocket? What can we do with a shallow pocket and outside the table? Can we do something? Manish, we'll start with you and then come back.
Yeah, let me take the easiest of the questions asked, and obviously let me start by responding. I think India is obviously not, heading towards being the third largest economy. I think financial constraints would be an issue, but not to an extent. So I think we should also start thinking ourselves that, okay, we are now getting into the great power at the global high table. I think we do our, using our whatever limited resources, but also punching above our weight in many ways, especially with the current sort of political leadership we have at the helm. Coming to the question which on the Kashmir, I think that is where I think think tanks play a very important role in terms of setting the narratives that we also need to actively engage, especially in the Western countries. And you are absolutely right. The narrative, you open Washington Post, you open New York Times, the only stories they carry are really horror stories of what is happening in conflicts. Either in Kashmir or in the Northeast. There are hardly any reporters from these top sort of newspapers going to either Kashmir and looking for them and really, looking out for what sort of development has happened I think the answer is really that we need to build our own networks, we need to build our own narratives, and I think one of the principal challenges in that sense, the Indian foreign policy community is really communicating the India story, and I'm sure there are going to be problems of, as Nitin was pointed out about the question of pluralism. So we need to also put out that story much more, rather than letting the world look only through the American eyes or the Western eyes. So I think that is, I hope I've answered your question. Sir, I think it's a fantastic question. India is, look at the level of India's exports crossed 21,000 crores. I do understand that there is an economic logic also driving the defense industry in terms of job generation, in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat. But I think the Ukraine thing, I think, was also in a specific context that India, to really pursue its geopolitical, geo-economic ambition, needs peace on its borders, needs global peace, needs global stability. And in that sense, as I said in my initial remarks also, that how India is looking at the exercise of power, the use of force. So even about nuclear weapons, it is really about self-defense. It was not seen. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
You know, the issue that has been raised in this present day geopolitical and geo-economic context is as simple as the fact that the United States of America wants to declare as the only country in the world, and all other countries are satellites. Either you accept it or get lost from the world. This is a kind of message which he has given. And he has already stated in his ex that United States President, I will chase and kill you. That has been messaged out. So the first question is why India cannot afford to go along with this is as simple as the fact that India has G20 with it, India has ASEAN, India has other multilateral trade agreements, and India has a standing in the world now that has to play an important role to tell the United States of America and China that kindly stop it, because China has already stopped Google. China has declared trade war against United States of America, but India needs America because 18% of the total exports from India goes to United States, and our growth is dependent more on exports now. This is first thing, one thing that I would like to point out. So India needs their global stability. Second thing is, colonization by United States of America. The executive orders issued immediately after assuming power by Trump is that Canada has to join as 51 first state of United States of America. You have no existence of your own. It is a kind of annexation that has happened in the past. Second thing, in discussion with Benjamin Netanyahu, our Israel Prime Minister, he said, I will take over Gaza Strip. It belongs to me. This kind of words that goes out. This is going to tomorrow, it can, Mexico, he has already said, unless you do stop sending people to America, undocumented people, I will impose 25% tariff on. And the kind of war that has been taking place, India cannot afford no longer, for the simple reason that around 46% of our total population, dependent on livelihood for agriculture, and the same percent on unorganized sector like MSMEs. They need to work and exist. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anita? Manish, I'll come back to you in the next round.
I just want to.
We will come back. We'll just
no,
come back.
On Trump, I think I read a wonderful line about Trump that please take him seriously, but not literally. So whenever he says anything, I think.
Okay, I like the point. We'll come back and talk about that. Yeah. Anita, please.
So I'll address the question that was specifically addressed to me. The panel was meant to talk about global conflicts, and in the 4.5 minutes that we were given, it was not possible to really talk about a lot of issues in particular. But it is also true that controlling narratives is a global necessity when we are talking about conflicts. And the necessity is not just of controlling the narratives from outside, but of probably creating a more positive, a new narrative from inside that then gets reflected. So that would be my reflection on it. And in terms of Indian peacekeeping, efforts and what India has done in various forums for peacekeeping, for maintaining stability. I think another thing that needs to be talked about is the whole question of the responsibility to protect and India's contribution to redefining the responsibility to protect, to ensure that whenever there is what is known as humanitarian intervention, it takes note of certain issues. So I think these are the two things that I thought I would flag.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think these were brilliant questions, but the fact that we just got 5 minutes was not justice enough to delve into details. But I think the military-industrial complex is a very important factor, and that's the reason we have this proliferation of conflicts. And if you look at what the Trump presidency is doing, particularly even in its first term with its private security companies and the military-industrial complex, I think there is an indication of how the conflicts are going to evolve and transform and proliferate. But having said that, India has been a responsible country when it comes to its own defense equipment. Many countries had requested, including Afghanistan, and has never given weapons because it might fall into wrong hands. So I think there's a certain amount of responsibility which comes with India. Now, coming to this question, we were asked to speak on global conflicts, so we didn't get into the internal. But very briefly, if you look at Northeast, I think it's one case of success if you look at how India resolved the Mizo insurgency. Nagaland is still in the works, and there are many conflicts in the region which needs a certain amount of understanding. And I think I'll link it to this question of peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. So India has done very well when you're talking about peacekeeping operations. But when you look at peace building, I think there is little work India needs to do much more in understanding what are the local grievances, what is it that contributes for local communities to join certain organizations and take on the role of insurgents or terrorists. And I think there we need to understand the economics, the identity, and the politics associated with that. I worked in Northeast for a couple of years, and I've lived in Northeast, so I know how it works at that level. So I had a little bit of understanding of what's happening on the ground in terms of the local specifics, in terms of the local needs. I think that is something India needs to understand much better. Comes to this question on narratives. I think we are more busy countering narratives rather than creating our own narratives. And how do you create a narrative? By a positive story. And what is a positive story? Again, my work in Kashmir and meeting the youth there was a clear indication that they want more of economic development. Are we giving them the opportunities? And if we are giving them that, I think the narrative will change by itself and you don't have to take much effort. So if you look at the larger scale in terms of understanding how the conflicts are transforming, both inside the country or at the global level, I think there are drivers which drive certain people and factors which are contributing to that conflict that have not been addressed. And it's time to do that. And the last point, I think, because the WPS agenda is very important, India has done very well in terms of contributing women, particularly in Liberia and South Sudan. But my worry is more in terms of how women are perceived in these peacekeeping units. You know, there's many stories about violence which occurs, abuse which occurs. So having women there, will it help address the conflict? I think it would, because if you look at what's happening in Africa, women peacekeepers are able to do much better there. So I think every peacekeeping unit should have women units. There should be a certain amount of gender mainstreaming, and there should be a certain amount of gender-sensitive training which occurs. So on the whole, I think if you look at what India has done in terms of peacekeeping, it can improvise. Peace building, I think it has to get into the local specific. And in terms of peacemaking, I think it has to play a larger diplomatic role, for which you need a larger vision, a strategic alignment of how you're going to resolve conflicts, how you're going to mediate in conflicts, and whether India has the bandwidth to do that or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move to the second round of questions. I have read some of the work on some of the issues that we have discussed, especially on women, peace and security. So I would request you to intervene with your enormous experience on that. And also the last question in the previous round, what sir has, what can India do? Should India be there in the table, on the table to do something, or India can do even without being on the table and with shallow packet, if I can get some inputs. And maybe at the next round, I would request Chetan and Nitin to intervene on role of education and public policy in addressing the larger issue. Sorry to... Next round, I'll come back to you. Now the floor is open. We have 20 more minutes. You want to...
Certainly that I find actually that no peacekeeper or anybody associated with the UN is sitting, and I'm a peacekeeper. I have been served in the with the United Nations. As far as the peace building is concerned, I think the funds are the major constraint. However, at the unit level, what we have done, or Indian Army has done it wherever we have been, basically the Africa, wherever the units were there, whatever the local needs were there, because our dealing was at the grassroots level, so we knew what actually they are looking for. And whatever within the resources of the Indian Army or the units which were deployed there, they have done, whether they wanted the roads to be built up, bonds to be built up, canals to be brought, or water channel to be brought into that area, those things have been done. But peace building is a affair where the funding is required. As I said, the fund givers are the fund takers. All contracts are based on the contract. When the government decides to do something in their own country, the funds are coming from somewhere else. So until unless we are having the deep pockets, or we are sitting on the table to resolve the issue. Now I come to the, as far as the question is concerned with the global conflicts. When we are referring to the global conflicts, why it is happening? It is basically a rivalry between the West and the East. And it is for their national interest. So as far as those things, in the last 10 years, what we find that India is able to intervene and give a suggestive way to resolve the issue. So I think that is the only way in which India, in the present circumstances, can proceed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. May I take a few more interventions?
Hello, my name is Chaitanya Giri. I'm from ORF Mumbai. Question is very simple. What do you think of usable technology, especially the software side of things, getting into hands of non-state actors?
I think you should tell us the answer instead of posing that as a question. I think I would rather prefer you to comment on it.
I want it for my next paper.
No, you are better positioned to take that question yourself. Any other person? Should I invite you, Geeta? You know, you have a on the WPS. You have worked. I think may I invite you also on the role of legislations that we have so far. How sufficient are they?
Okay, call me a realist or call me a skeptic, but I'm going to put the cat among the pigeons. I think we've all been having this very hunky-dory picture, and I like Shubha's question. Can we do anything without the high table? Can we do anything without China's deep pockets? I think that's a very relevant thing which has to be very seriously considered, because the reality is, today as we see it, if you look at the map of the world and then you start coloring it, you will see China's huge commitment economically in almost the entire continents of South America and Africa. That's an undeniable truth. We can polish it, we can call it by different names, we can use another nomenclature, but the reality is that. That's why I said I'm a realist. And it's all very well to talk about development as far as India is concerned. That's good. Nobody denies, nobody takes that away. That's what we want. We want to play a major role, not a hegemonic role, but definitely a major role. And we don't want at the same time to take a direct, I'm a little careful with my words here, a direct role inside a conflict situation. So Shanti knows, she's worked so long in Afghanistan matters, she knows that India never went into it, but India did do a lot. And I think there lies the answer, Shubha, for the question you asked, whether you can play a role without actually being the director. Can you play a positive role in conflict resolution, development, dealing with peacekeeping? Yes. The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's very, very important to be transparent about it in the global arena, and more importantly, to be very pragmatic about it. How far can we go and no further? That's my answer.
Thank you. Any other question? Otherwise, I'll go back to, sir, please. And then we'll go back to the panel for this one.
Hi, I'm Jagan Tambagode. I'm from TIS Guwahati campus, and I also teach at the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. I have one comment as well as one question for the panel. One is that I think at the moment, if you look at both at the global level as well as national level, then resource question is very important. And whatever the conflict that you take as an example, if you take the global issues, then the South China Sea conflict is one of the pertinent examples of resource conflict. And I think the discussion shall also focus on resource question. The comment for the, the question for the panel is that if you look at the contemporary approaches to peace and conflict at the moment, then the global players, quote unquote, the global players are less interested in addressing the conflict that are happening, for instance, in African subcontinent. To what extent India can play a significant role in resolving conflict, which are not necessarily involved by the, some of the major players, but some of the quote unquote less, significant players at the global level. Thank you.
Now we'll get back to the panel and come for the third round. Nitin and Chetan, you should be ready with that. Now, a supplementary question to what Geeta said, Shanti, to you. Is there a template that we can take it from? You were in Afghanistan, you saw Afghanistan from 3 sides or 4 sides. Is there a template that we can take it from how we did what we did, and whether that template can be applied to another conflict, or can we put it, this is the India way of dealing without being in the table and having shallow pockets? I'll start with you and then we'll go in down that. Thanks for bringing that point.
Thank you. Thank you for putting me in the spot, Geeta, and Shubha. But Afghanistan, I think, was a classic case study of how things went terribly wrong and how India did terribly well, right? India had a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan, and the template evolves from there. But having said that, there's also a note of caution. India had to move out on August 15, 2021, lock, stock, and barrel when Taliban took over. And why? Because fundamentally, India put in a lot of money there. We pledged more than 1.3 billion USD. We were the largest regional donor. We did all the good work. We built roads. We gave them whatever we wanted. Everything was based on Afghan needs and ownership. And at the end, what happened is there was no state capacity to retain itself when the Taliban took over. So the fundamental mistake every country did, including India, was not focusing on institution building. We did capacity building. We did tremendous amount of capacity building. We got a lot of Afghans here who are still here on scholarships, but still struggling with their visas. We got a lot of technical staff there. We built the parliament, built the dam. We got them electricity. We got them so many things. But why didn't it sustain? That leads us to the question that, is India capable of intervening in Africa? I would say no at this point of time, because just for the fundamental reason that India avoids being party to the conflict. India is involved in countries, particularly in the neighborhood, because of the strategic need. Afghanistan is very crucial for India just because of what's happening in the neighborhood. It needs to have certain amount of presence there. And that's why India was involved, because of that geopolitical reason. One is fundamentally Pakistan. More on the economics, it was a land bridge connecting South Asia with Central Asia. So if you look at the templates and lessons learned for India, which I'm not sure if any policy or think tank space has done it, because we don't want to learn lessons. We know enough. But as think tankers, as somebody who has done so much of good work in Afghanistan, to see it wasted now is something I think is very crucial for us to sit back and look, because other countries have done. Everyone's doing that. So one is, when you intervene in theaters like Afghanistan or any conflict situation, which is an ongoing conflict situation, you got to be clear of what is your end vision, what do you want to see Afghanistan is. India's fundamental goal, stated goal, was peace and stability in Afghanistan. It's remained for decades together. India supported whatever regime was in power. It supported the so-called democratically elected government in Afghanistan. None of those elections were free and fair. All were fraud mud, but still India stood by those governments. So at the end, it didn't have the retaining capacity. So this leads to the problem of giving aid. And this is just not India's problem. It's actually more a global problem. Look at the money given by USAID. Where did it go? It ended up as phantom aid. It never reached the Afghan people. basically because Afghanistan didn't have the absorption capacity. So much money went in, never reached the people where it should have reached it. So at the end, it was the contractors and the consultants who were taking money out of the country. So there was hardly any work occurring on the development ground. What was happening in the governments there? None of them had the legitimacy. That leads to the question of the elites and the predatory state which emerges in this kind of conflict theaters. So India could actually do more in getting involved because given the fact that India had goodwill and when the so-called deal between the Taliban and the US was being chalked out in Doha, and there was a need to build an intra-Afghan consensus, India was the only country which had that kind of stake with all the ethnic groups and could have brought them back to the table. And herein, I think India could have played a very important role in peacemaking and peace building. And that's why I keep emphasizing that though India has done well in the UN, but in local conflict theaters, India can do much better. But I think this can be a subject for longer discussion, and I think Shobha is stopping me because if I start on this, I don't end. Sorry.
Thank you for that intervention. That the response shows the 2 decades of experience that she has in Afghanistan. Anita, over to you.
Yeah, that was really interesting, and I would largely agree with you that simply capacity building is probably not the solution. You have to build institutions, but then you have to think about what kind of institutions you're able to build in what kind of space. So, the kind of institutions that work in certain areas of Asia would probably not work in certain areas of Africa. What role can India play in the many local conflicts in Africa? Now, I would largely agree with you that there is not much that we can do in, interfering in local conflicts. But does India have an option? I mean, China is invested in Africa. It has, expanded its monetarily. It has expanded and really invested a lot of money. And there has to come a time when returns from that would be asked for. So we have to take that into account. We have to keep that in mind when we are looking at global conflicts in other parts of Asia or Africa.
I'll have only 2 points to make. For global conflict resolution, bilateral talks and bilateral organizations and institutions are very crucial. The most unfortunate part that has been happening for the last 2 decades, whether it is under Joe Biden or under Trump or EU, European Union, has been happening that the international and UN organization has been, devastated. And the life of WTO has been counted already. That WTO is going to collapse within a year or 2, as far as I understand. That this is what the international, the conflict resolution people, the academicians and policymakers have been saying. WTO is going to end. And WHO is also ceased to exist. And third, the climate change summit that has been, US has unilaterally withdrawn from it, that I am not going to agree to it. And energy, the power, oil is very important. And it is the lobby of battery lobby that has been, promoting car, the electric car. So this kind of international organization, it is the responsibility of the India to rebuild on that and instill, confidence in the, especially in third world countries and developing economies, that we need this. And we have a, international bilateral organization that India has been leading, and India has a standing in the world record by history. I think India will be able to lead the world in this case. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think I would completely agree with what my fellow panelists said about the limitations of of capacity building in conflict zones. But I think we also need to be mindful about when we talk about institutional building. It does take time. It takes at times generations, and and in fact the best part about India is that India is not seen as intervening unlike maybe the Chinese or Americans, obviously. So I think we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you. Now let's move to the last round. I'll start with Chetan and Nitin.
We should learn from our intervention in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, a friendly country like Bhutan. So, Afghanistan also. I mean, Afghanistan, we did major economic investments, but where has it led us? Maldives. None of our neighboring countries, we have got any results. So we really need to rethink about it and the role of non-state actors. We've been talking only of the state actors. If that is not working, how do we bring in the non-state actors? Thank you.
That's a good question. We will answer that as well. Chetan, I would especially, the point that Shanti made in terms of capacity building and institution building. I know the capacity building that you both are engaged in terms of education and public policy. How much do we need to take this capacity building and convert that into institution building?
Yeah. Thanks, Professor Subha. I'm Chetan here from Bangalore at Chanakya University. This particular thought is something that I'm thinking right now in terms of how I can respond to, but there's a long way to discuss on this. But maybe we have a sort of reference to our existing own domestic policy, the national education policy, for instance, how it kind of provides perspective on looking at internationalization on one side, that is more of the inflow and outflow of students, but more importantly, how to showcase a nation with a perspective that it is unique in terms of building this sort of cooperation, peaceful living and coexistence and so on and so forth. But if you take the case of interventions after peace building, that is where it becomes critical for institutionalization capacity building. I think the one good case in point is Rwanda, the post-genocide, how it kind of changed the whole nations. But because that's where one gap exists, that is post-conflict resolution or peace building, this component is often missed out. I think that is where I think we all have to reflect upon. And I think there is a direction which is given in the document also of the NEP, which is there. Most African nations, including the African Union, acknowledged the changes that are coming in the policy and how it can reshape and revisit the idea of soft power, cultural component, etc. That's how I would think at, but I think that's a critical to reflect on that. Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to win any friends among my friends in the army by saying this. But I think we need a fundamental review of how institutions, I'll talk later. First, more importantly, what you were talking about, a fundamental review on how India uses force, military force outside its borders. Currently, there's a default option that, you participate in UN peacekeeping in all kinds of places. It's absolutely disconnected with our national interest, but we send forces everywhere. It's popular among the armed forces units which get to do UN duties, but from a national interest perspective, I don't think there is any gain. The second way we do it is willy-nilly when there is a evacuation required. There's a civil war going on somewhere, Indians are caught somewhere, and then we'll get the Navy or the special forces to go in there and evacuate people out. But coherently, there is nothing, right? So I think we need to be able to look at why and where and how India will deploy forces militarily. And as a result of that exercise, we'll be able to determine whether you want to do peacekeeping or not. My own sense is that in a changing world where, basic norms of political conduct don't exist anymore, exposing our troops, putting our troops into dangerous situations which are politically fraught is not a very smart idea. So overseas entanglement using force, I think, is not a good idea in this particular phase of time. That's number one. So I would be very, very cautious about any kind of force deployment outside India, other than when it's really in our national interest, like when we have to do Bangladesh and other in defense, other than in defense. Now, institution building, again, I think Shanti's experience and her story tells you that there is only so much you could do, right? Ultimately, it depends on whether the people in those countries are willing to do the minimum necessary to get things together and build institutions, right? Building institutions is about cooperation. Are you willing to exert a minimum level of cooperation to get your own act together? In in places that doesn't happen, there's no point even trying, right? So I would argue that let's not worry about, those big broad agenda. Build fantastic institutions of governance and education and governance education in India, and attract and open these doors to people who want to come. So you don't go and say, look, I'm going to country X and saying, I'm giving you so many scholarships, come and study in India. Instead of that, saying, look, we're going to be open to all the countries of the world. Whoever wants to participate, please do. Right? So I'm become a lot more skeptical about interventionism in foreign countries.
Well, the final point makes a lot of sense, Nitin. Thank you for that input. Is there anything that you would want to respond? Shanti, you will have the final word.
Okay, thank you. I think it's an important point, but I think we need to make a distinction between intervention and institution building, right? What I'm talking about in institution building is long-term generational project. It's not this quick-term capacity building projects. Give them scholarship, get them here. There's no point doing that, because what happens in those countries is that there is elite capture which doesn't let people govern. So if you have to improve governance, education, health, employment opportunities in those countries, you have to work on institutions of governance in that countries. So what happened in Afghanistan was a classic case. And the second case is Afghanistan always remained dependent on aid. India also provided aid. Most of the money went to the corrupt elite. It didn't reach the people. So I think we got to be careful of how we give money. Ultimately, it's the taxpayers' money. Secondly, how do you intervene? Militarily, Sri Lanka was a case in point, and other theaters in South Asia also gives you an indication of how does India intervene. I think it's more than the military, it's the economic, and with the economic, you need development and gender specialists. You need more on governance. India did not want to meddle in other countries' affairs. That's perfectly understood. But it is in India's national interest that these countries are stable. You don't want an unstable neighborhood. You don't want an anti-India neighborhood. After all the money and all the goodwill, you don't want things changing against you. So how do you do that? So I think we need a longer discussion, but in this 2 minutes and this Shubha keeping me on the timeline, I'm not able to. It's like Afghanistan. Get out of Afghanistan soon, get out of the room fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. But still, she made a lot of we will. Still, she made a lot of sense. Despite the restriction, we may not have ended with a happy note. The previous session ended, but we are ending with a happy note. We are going to have dinner. We are going to have dinner now. Yeah? Now, let's give a big hand of applause for the panel, and also to the chair who did a good job with 3 rounds of discussion. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Vivek. Vivek, thank you for giving us this opportunity.